1 Corinthians 14. We are picking up in verse 6. Last week we introduced this section of looking at verses 1 through 5 and noting that now where we are is specifying the use now, the proper use of the miraculous. He established what these things were and the problems that the Corinthians had in chapter 12. He worked on their attitude in applying themselves in love in chapter 13, understanding that these things are going to be going away and that they needed to understand the temporary nature of that and focus on what was the eternal in all of this, which was the message and how it needed to change them. So when we looked at chapter 14, he is now addressing how these gifts that they do have, and he is glad that they have them, now should be put to use properly, and that they were not to be used just, we'd say to just do whatever. That they all were focused on a particular purpose, and that was how then Paul wants them to see what they have. And as we consider, and throughout this, we talked about how the applications from this passage can be a little tricky because you have a definite situation that is not like today. And that's actually very helpful for us because it becomes more obvious that that's not how things work today, which means we have to recognize what it meant then first, and then get over to understand, okay, what parallels this so that we can make the right application. Now, in fact, that is how we're supposed to approach the Bible everywhere. And so it's an important way to learn that we first need to understand it for them, and then we can make application rather than just kind of jumping right in. It's very helpful to learn this passage, or this approach with this passage. So we learn here is the first 5 verses, yes, I want you to have these gifts and use these gifts, but there's a key to it that he's establishing that is essentially where he's going throughout the whole of the rest of the chapter. And that is, the gifts are not about the show. They're not about making people think about you. The point of these spiritual gifts was to get the message of the gospel to people, particularly he's talking about within the assembly, so that people can learn. And through that, know and draw closer to what they ought to be for God. That's the purpose. And that's why he keeps, and he will keep coming back to edification. We saw that early on. You're going to see it again. And so it's keeping what was given in context with its purpose. And the good news is, and this is why I brought the other up, is that purpose still exists. The purpose of edification for the spiritual growth of the Lord's people still exists as a need, as an end. The thing that's changed, as chapter 13 pointed out, is the means. But that helps us to understand that we have a responsibility to make sure that the means we have are being used toward that end as well. That was their problem. We need to make sure that we don't let it become a problem for us. So now let's look beginning in verse 6. But now, brethren, if I come to you speaking with tongues, what shall I profit you unless I speak to you either by revelation, by knowledge, by prophesying, or by teaching? Well, there's a nice rhetorical question, which is saying, what's the point? Now notice the nature of the emphasis of what the comparison is. He's coming to you by speaking in tongues, a miraculous gift. That was the one they valued the most. It's able to speak in this other language miraculously. But he says, what is the use of that? What's the point if it doesn't come with something else? Now notice what he just did is they had valued this up here, and he says, in actuality, it really isn't a big deal because it doesn't offer anything unless it has something with it. Because he says you need to add, there's no profit to it. It says, unless I speak to you either by revelation, by knowledge, by prophesying, or by teaching. That is, those are 4 different ways in which information, new information, was conveyed, where people would grow. To understand maybe the point he is making is that it might be impressive to be able to know, and it is in many ways, to know a foreign language. Okay, there could be a lot of things. We'll make the application in a moment. Here, it's we can speak a foreign language. And Paul is kind of pointing out and saying, but what are you saying? What are you saying? Does it really make a difference that you speak a foreign language if what you're saying is not actually designed for what people are needing within the congregation? I mean, if I can speak a foreign language and all I do is get up and speak in a foreign language and talk to you about all the football games yesterday, okay, looky there, he can speak a foreign language. Is it helping you at all? No, not only do you not understand what I'm saying, but it's not the reason why that gift was given. So while, if you think about the benefit of it, of having that gift, interacting with people who only spoke that other language, that's beneficial. That was part of the nature of the gift. So, you need to be able to welcome people, talk to people, interact with people. That would be beneficial. But when he is putting this in the overall concept here in the framework of the assembly, that's not what that's for. The purpose there is, he notes, revelation. That is the idea of unveiling new things. God's telling you new things. Okay, and so that would be one opportunity of what would happen by that. Or knowledge. There's some kind of side information that fills in a blank somewhere that you need, knowledge. Or prophesying. And this probably, within these 4, is probably looking at more forthtelling, by telling you something you couldn't know otherwise. He's doing that. Or teaching, which is kind of the idea of tying things together. Right? All of that is to bring about better understanding of God's will, both by being given new information, but also connecting all of that together. So if you're just going to, get around and talk in a foreign language, that's not why it was given. And so that's where he is wanting to make sure they understand that difference. Verse 7. Even things without life, whether a flute or harp, when they make a sound, unless they make a distinction in the sounds, how will it be known what is piped or played? All right, so he's going to use a couple illustrations here. So you've got a flute or a harp, and it's probably closer, if you think about it, to being something more like a pipe and a lyre is more likely, I'm thinking, time-wise. But all you've got is a wind instrument or a string instrument, okay, that he's talking about. But you've got those, okay. What's the point of them? It says, unless they make a distinction in the sounds. Okay? Now so we're going to get music, so David, you may have to help me on this. Okay. He's worried now. Okay. Okay, let's look at it this way. I'm going to illustrate this way. Okay? If we're going to play Name That Tune, and I do this, dum 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 dum. That's not even really a tune now, is it? There's no distinction in the rhythm or in what the notes would be. It's the same. As far as that's what it is like if someone is speaking a foreign language to you and you don't know the language. It all sounds the same. And sit back there and say, okay, it sounds, okay, there's something, I can tell there's something different there, but I don't know what it means. Okay? He says, there's no practical purpose to it. And that is actually really helpful to understand, is if it's not communicating anything, you're missing the point. David? There's noise, but there's not really any communication of music going on. I like that, handing a recorder to a toddler. Okay. The point is it is missing the point, John. Uh-huh. Yeah. It doesn't accomplish, it doesn't accomplish what the point is in the nature of the singing. He's going to get to singing in a minute in a different way. But yeah, the whole idea is that are we actually using what we have to communicate what we're supposed to be doing within this framework? He is talking about the people who are going to get up and lead it. I don't know if you've realized this where we're going, so I'll give you a hint. He's really talking about all the people he's going to be naming, and as he's going through and looking at this, have to do within an assembly about the responsibilities of the people leading. About don't get up there just because you have a gift of speaking in a tongue. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to take their turn and get up there and speak because you can. It says there needs to be a point to it of what is for the spiritual purpose of why an assembly exists and what will benefit the people where they will grow spiritually. That's where all of this is aimed at. It says you're not going to benefit from this idea of some kind of the child on the recorder. That's not going to tell you anything. Now he's going to add to this, so you start off with that idea generally is, I can't even tell the difference. Well, the next verse, he moves this forward. For if the trumpet makes an uncertain sound, who will prepare for battle? Now, I don't know specifically how we get into it, but within our own history, I think almost bugle would be better for getting across the point. Okay? In the army, they would use bugles we know just a couple, right? We know charge, okay? And if you've gone to a ball game, you know charge, and you know taps, okay? That's pretty much what you know, okay? But there were actually different kind of calls that were designed because that was the communication you could have before the times of long-distance communication of even radios would be available. And they would do some that were within sightline communication, but early in terms of warfare, you had what your signals were communicated often by a bugle. And you would have these signs that would tell you a retreat, a charge, whether it was to meet at a certain place, what you were to do. It communicated things. So when he's not just switching instruments here, he's adding an aspect of context. They would have understood very well that the whole point of this instrument was to communicate, that it needed to say something so that people could know what to do. Okay, that's what he's getting across here in verse 8. And now he's having these two illustrations. He now gets to verse 9. So likewise, in other words, in the same way, you, unless you utter by the tongue words easy to understand, how will it be known what is spoken? For you will be speaking into the air. All right, so now we've finally gotten to, this is about you. I'm not just having a conversation about flutes and harps and trumpets. The point is I'm drawing in this application from the principle of verse 6 of being focused on you need to bring something that is helpful, that's guiding, that's information from God. That's the focus. And so speaking in a foreign language doesn't accomplish that on its own. So he says, unless you utter by the tongue words easy to understand. Now, of course, that in this context is talking about in the language that people understand. Now, so that's the immediate application. That's what he's talking about. He's saying there's no point whatsoever in having someone who has that gift get up and speak when no one there understands it. It says that does not have any benefit at all. So in what way is anybody going to know that? Now, the way would be, and he'll get to this later, it has to be interpreted. It have to be some kind of interpretation, but that's not even always necessary. If no one is there that speaks that language, why are you up there? Okay? The point is it's needed, it's valuable, and it's doing something that is needed by the people so that they will get the message and learn something and grow from it. That's the point. So when he says this, now we're going to move forward a little bit to, that's the original meaning, but now application. And he says, let's read it again with that application in mind. Unless you utter by the words or the tongue words easy to understand, how will it be known what is spoken? For you will be speaking into the air. Is it possible, now this shows you how we're in application now. Okay, we've gone from the meaning, we're talking about foreign language, now I'm going to make application. Certainly that could be true. I bring Willie in here. Willie says, hey, I want to turn. He gets up and speaks in Spanish, and all y'all are just going, don't get it. I'll lean in and, chapel on Wednesdays when we have a joint chapel, and I'm listening. I feel like if I can capture maybe 25% as I'm learning Spanish, 25% of what they're saying, I've had a good day. Okay, so, but in general, that's just not going to help. But now let's think about this another way so that we focus now on the purpose, not just the absolute meaning, but the purpose as well that he's already designated of why this is true. Can you do the same thing in English? Can I use, I used to have, when down at Granbury Street, there's this one sweet woman. She said that we should have a little thing on the boards, that there's somebody running the board should be tied into a dictionary, so that whenever Kevin used a word, they just pop the definition up on the screen. Okay, yeah, you'd be for that? Slow it down a bit. Hard to understand. I get you. Yeah, absolutely. You got to learn to listen faster. Those are both legitimate applications of this. That what you have is that if the end point is not getting across, it doesn't matter how great my material is if I'm using words that you don't understand. Right? Which all that isn't Titus 2, 11 and 12, a great salvific passage. One of the greatest things we enjoy doing back upstairs, Lee, is soterology. It is absolutely fantastic. Don't you agree? All right, so we can take fancy, everything I just said is all legitimate, real words, but it doesn't communicate. And so in understanding whatever we're going to go is that their communication is not just about this person who is talking, it's about the people to whom he is talking. And that's why in different ways, as I tell the students, is your illustrations have to change depending upon who's there. The nature of your language needs to change depending upon who's there. The education level may be different. The message doesn't at its core, but as someone who has spoken at, say, very small places with limited, out rural areas versus doing something as a lecture that's supposed to be scholarly, those are two very different things to do. Even if you're teaching the same thing, the approach has to change. Why? Because it doesn't, someone said it. Because it doesn't matter if you don't get them, it doesn't matter how well I know the message if you don't get the message. The point of teaching and preaching and what he is trying to get across to them is not to put on some kind of display or to prove something to you about me. That's kind of where they were. Look at me, I've got this miraculous gift. It's about what that can do for you. And therefore, everything should be shaped in as good a way as possible, where despite as I look around, I see people of a lot of different backgrounds. And so that's one of the challenges of doing this. So you have to use more than one illustration. Paul does that. You have to be able to use different kinds of words, Sometimes it's about educating by using a word and then explaining the word. Try to lift everyone up and understand moving forward. Tracy insists that I need to explain the word hermeneutics every time I say it. You can thank her sometime. Science of interpretation. Okay? So all of those things we do because it doesn't do any good if I'm using all this terminology if you don't get the message. That's why we should use simpler language and lean into illustration to make the point in teaching and to make sure that that comes across. There are a number of different ways to do it. But if we're going to be true to what his point is here, is it shouldn't simply become some kind of thing where, oh, isn't that nice, someone up here gave a lesson. The question is are we getting sufficient takeaway where I'm growing from it, I've learned something from it, I have something to add to my life spiritually, and I leave here closer to God and a better person, a better Christian because of it. And that should be my aim as I'm looking at this. This is my aim whenever I come into class for you. And that's what he is really getting to here. So, otherwise, you're just speaking to the air. It's not going to land on any ears that matter. So he says in verse 10, there are, it may be, so many kinds of languages in the world, and none of them is without significance. The word significance can kind of throw you. It really, without a voice, which doesn't help at all. But the point is that all of these languages are designed for communication. And no matter which ones they may be, he says, there are many kinds in the world. He says, they all exist to try to communicate with people, one another. That's why they exist. They're not there just to make noise. Now, why does he need to say that? It's a reminder for the people who received it as a gift. That the point of languages all around the world, essentially saying, all over the world, they don't have those languages as something that they sit around and just make a bunch of noise on Friday nights. That's not what they exist for. They're designed to communicate something. See how he's still directly on point with all of these? He just keeps coming around and reminding them to remember why this exists, why God gave it. So he draws a conclusion beginning in verse 11. Let's take a look. Therefore, if I do not know the meaning of the language, I shall be a foreigner to him who speaks, and he who speaks will be a foreigner to me. Just a little background on this for appreciation of he's emphasizing it. Paul uses this multiple times. The word foreigner is the word barbarian. Does anyone have a translation that does it that way? Barbarian. You may not appreciate why does he say barbarian? Well, barbarians, the Greeks came up with that term for those who did not speak Greek or didn't speak it well. So for what they sounded like, it's actually onomatopoeia. It sounded to them like bar, 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 bar. I'm not making that up. Okay? So it was just someone who was just kind of mumbling to themselves. And he's saying that's as what they are. That's the situation. So here we are, and it makes sense within the Greek context here in Corinth for that term to be very much used. He says, if I don't know the meaning of the language, I'm the barbarian. Oh, that kind of turned it a little bit. What are we doing? I shall be a foreigner, a barbarian to him who speaks, and he who speaks will be a barbarian to me. Foreigner. Is it, we're not going to know what each other's talking about. So, notice the emphasis, it's about the meaning. The meaning. What's the universal way to get someone to understand you who doesn't speak your language? Get louder, okay. We all do it. It doesn't work, but we all do it. Okay. Slow down. Speak up and slow down. Say all your words very slowly, and that's the key. Okay. It says that it doesn't get across. Again, why? Meaning. It's about meaning. So now you get then to verse 12. Even so you, so he's tying this back to what he just concluded. You, since you are zealous for spiritual gifts, all right, now he's going all the way back up when he said good. He said in verse 1, that's a good thing. Zealous, enthusiastic, okay? On fire for, but enthusiastic. Since you are zealous for spiritual gifts, again, see verse 1, let it be for the edification of the church that you seek to excel. Now, you'll notice at least in the New King James, I think the King James is the same, the let it be is in italics. The main verb is seeking, but he puts at the very beginning for emphasis for or toward the edification. Okay? Toward the edification. Remember what we talk about edification means? That's good teaching for you. Building up. Okay, good. Building up, growing stronger spiritually. Okay. Toward the building up, stronger understanding and spiritual understanding of the church. Now, he's really working within the context of the assembly here, and you need to remember that church, ecclesia, also means assembly. That's a core meaning of the word. Okay, so when he is coming through here, it's for the building up of the assembly that you should seek. That seek, that means put some energy into it, go after it, make that your aim. Here's where I'm heading with all this. What am I trying to accomplish by what I'm about to say? I'm seeking toward edification of the assembly. Everybody there needs to be on my mind. He's about to make that distinction in the verses that are coming up. So I'm trying to make sure I am there, and I want you to grow, and I want you to grow, and I want you to grow. And therefore I need to speak with that in mind, toward that end, and it needs to be my aim as I seek this to excel. Word is to abound. That's where all the good stuff is, in other words. The benefit, the abounding, the great end reached is when we're seeking to help one another grow spiritually, to be built up, to be better, not just, I like edification because it's not just growing in knowledge. Edification is about growing in you. That you are stronger and a better Christian because of what's being said. So that whole idea of building up, it's not just that a boy. Okay, that's not, edification is far more than that. That the nature of the words should not just be encouragement, but that you're leaving better as a Christian. And that's what his aim is. And it should be, he says, the aim of all of us. So verse 13. Therefore, let him who speaks in a tongue pray that he may interpret. These actually, I know we're moving a new section, and I believe they're at the back if y'all don't have. So you have this whole idea of, okay, what are we going to do with this? The one who speaks, so he's gotten up speaking, okay, let him pray that he may interpret. What is Paul telling them to do, and what does that tell us about the process within a miraculous context of what they were doing? No. He's going to show in a second that they did. But it was also, if they're going on about it, there's a next step that you need to be able to put it all together. Now, and remember that he did separate the idea of speaking in tongues and interpret within chapter 12. So that was usually what that says would coincide with one another. They would usually both would be the case for the person. They'd have both gifts. But what I was pointing out was also the idea of prayer. Now, is that being used? Is he's asking? It's actually a different focus, if nothing else. If you have that gift, you have that within your control. We're going to see that later on in the chapter. This is pray. So is it using that in a literal way of praying to God, or is it used some other way? If he's praying to interpret, you're not going to pray. A lot of your commentators will say, he's praying so he'll get that gift. No. If he doesn't have that gift, praying's not going to help. Okay? He doesn't have the gift. That's not how those gifts are passed on. But it could be that this was an approach of how you thinking about what the next step is as far as taking that message, okay, now going to God, I'd like to do this, and then stop and pray and interpret. It's a fascinating kind of idea. I don't know that we can get precisely there, and it could be that he's not even focusing on doing it there in the moment, so much as he is telling the person that you need to be wanting to do both, not just one. And I think that's actually the end in mind here, is if you're going to get up and you're going to speak in the tongue because that's maybe there's somebody there, and this would be an instance we'd have someone, say, walk in off the street or something, and say, in this instance, we don't have a place to send them. They speak, let me see here. Let me get her. Okay. Why not? They speak French. They come in. You know what that tells me? I can't go get Willie. That's not helpful. But in this first century environment, then you would have had the ability, someone would have had that gift, so that whoever comes in with any language, that would have been what they could have handled. Okay. So, but now in the process, they're being spoken to, or either they're going to have that direct thing spoken, and also could you have someone who visited that needs the interpretation? We're going to see both of them. The people coming in, they're the ones who speak the foreign language, that they need someone speaking directly to them, which that would have been the gift, and then the interpretation from that so everyone else gets the benefit. Or you reverse that, and someone comes in and would speak, but they speak in a different language. Okay, maybe they came from Rome and they speak Latin, and now you need someone that solely their job is to interpret for the people who are speaking Greek, which is what happens if I go overseas and I'm going to speak somewhere, then I would need someone to interpret within some of those languages. So it's because we tend to be in a situation today, even though we have the Spanish work, we don't think of it because we don't work in the same way. They weren't separated. It was all within one assembly, and you worked within that, okay? So, and especially when, they would have been, mostly Corinth would have been all Greek speakers. But someone comes in that's a member of the church, they didn't have someone else for them to go. So, there was a provision made. And that provision was translation, okay? Why? So that they can make sure they gain too. Now, it has to do with the native idea we talked about last week of what you're most comfortable in. For example, I don't know if you've had many conversations with some of our members or Spanish speakers, but many of them can get along in English. They can work with you in English, but it's not really the comfort. You think you have a trouble kind of following me sometimes. They'd have a really hard time. Okay, you'd have to slow it all down because it's just too much. Okay, so, but that's different from when you don't understand a thing at all. Those are the situations we have to think about within a first century context, and then as we move forward to thinking about, okay, how are we going to make this work within a 21st century context and still get the aim right? Okay, that is, every single time we've come across an application or even illustration, it's been on getting the meaning across, and then application toward the idea of where those people have value and come away with value of what they're learning every time. And that we have to make sure that that's what we're making sure comes across in what we're trying to communicate. So then he says in verse 14, "For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my understanding is unfruitful." All right. Now, if all of I'm just going to assume right now that y'all have all those verses down we covered. I know you're wondering who's teaching. We covered all those verses, but now we got this one. Now it gets difficult. All right? Because anytime you introduce spirit, it becomes difficult. And because it's going to be clear, I want to go ahead and show you this so you understand the problem. I'm going to read verses 14 through 16. "For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my understanding is unfruitful. What is the conclusion then? I will pray with the spirit, I will also pray with the understanding. I will sing with the spirit, I will also sing with the understanding. Otherwise, if you bless with the spirit, how will he who occupies the place of the uninformed say amen at your giving of thanks, since he does not understand what you say?" Now, if you check either commentaries or translations, they definitely don't agree on whether or not what the Spirit's talking about here. Pretty much everyone has my spirit as being the spirit of the individual. But in 16, about that's how you would speak, whether that's by my spirit or the Holy Spirit, that's a different question. And then you have, in verse 15, this passage which lies where one of them, pretty sure the human spirit, then afterwards in verse 16, very possibly the Holy Spirit, and then you got in verse 15, something else. Which one is it? And because you are limited in your context to try to figure out what it's accomplishing, and then you have to also decide in 15 the parallelism between understanding and spirit. Because clearly, I will pray with the spirit, I will pray with the understanding also, I will sing with the spirit, I will sing with the understanding also. That parallelism is intentional. The question is it intentional enough to where it is going to be in each time, or is it, I will sing by means of the Spirit, I will sing with the understanding also. I will pray by means of the Spirit, I'll pray with understanding also. So now it changes up, and that's all possible. All of those are possible, a way to work this within the context. So what that means is that the words given on themselves are not enough. We have to really figure out the context in a situation where, to some extent, both apply. Meaning, if they were speaking with a tongue, and this is within a context of chapter 14, going all the way back to chapter 8, the whole section's about spiritual gifts. Okay, chapter 12, about spiritual gifts. So we know that's the context. And it's already cited in the beginning part of chapter 12 that it's the Holy Spirit is the one that makes those gifts possible. So we know that that's true. We also have seen, though, that he has in context times in which it's also about my spirit, about what I'm doing in this process as a human being. And that's still true even if you have miraculous gifts provided by the Holy Spirit. I love the fact that Paul did this to me, because I get to talk about how important it is to be clear and communicate, and then he gives me this. I mean, really? Is that fair? So we're going to have to work through that particular problem and trying to look at what are the possibilities. And I think it's one of those things, you see it within both translations and in how people interpret it, where each one is actually possible depending upon how you are looking at the text. And that's why the context here is going to be so important of trying to figure that out. What other problem do we have to face as we go through and trying to figure this interpretation out? What do we have else lurking in the background? You already used this verse in different ways, don't you? Verse 15. So if we already have maybe a particular use of it that we use that in, I will sing with I'll pray with the Spirit, I'll pray with the understanding also, I'll sing with the Spirit, I'll sing with the understanding also. And so there's kind of a built-in interpretation for how it's been used over time. That's always kind of there. What we have to do, in any time when we come across something difficult, is say, this is what I've been taught in the past, this is how we kind of have used this. Now I've got to know that about myself, of how this is used, and consider it while not acting like it's already been decided. That's the challenge of Bible study, is everyone's been exposed to different ideas in Scripture. It's the baggage you bring with it. The challenge is often to separate, to be aware of it, separate from it, and evaluate it independently, and to do so as fairly as possible. So, here's the great thing about this. I just created a problem of interpretation for you, and I will see you in 3 weeks. You're welcome. I did that for you, Melanie. I was thinking, I figure that in that amount of time, you'll be able to tell me when I get back what this means. That's good teaching right there.